sometimes in our conversations, I feel that you don't want to be fine because you feel you'd feel guilty if you felt fine.
Yeah.
That you want to carry that hurt with you.
You do carry the hurt with you. It's not that you don't want to feel fine. It's that you do carry the hurt with you. I think a lot of us carry the hurt with us. When someone says to me, like the younger generation says to me, I want to be like you, I want to follow your path, whether it's journalism or humanitarian or whatever, what's your advice?
Yeah.
And I say, you need to recognize that you will give up a part of yourself that you probably will not be able to define, and you need to be okay with that.
I've been wondering recently about why conflicts fade from the public eye and what that means and what we can do about it. Is it just, and this is a topic we've considered on the podcast before, the inevitable result of seeing forever wars on our screens? Or is there something else at play? It got me thinking about the role of emotion in how we think about these wars and the motivating power of the stories that we see and that we are invited to see. The most obvious emotions, anger and hatred, are perhaps the most visible, but there are others like apathy that I think might play just as important a role in how these conflicts develop and then how they gradually recede from public view. Of course, I'm talking about the war in Gaza. The war in Gaza has been ongoing now for more than a year and a half, and while it is still part of the news cycle, it certainly doesn't command the attention it once did and the urgent attention it requires. And the pictures, the stories we get from inside Gaza are increasingly rare, deliberately so, as we discuss in the podcast. Throughout the conflict, we brought on the journalist and humanitarian Arwa Damon for conversations that have struck a chord with our audience. In her second interview with us last year, Arwa described in brutal detail what she had seen on her first trip into Gaza with her humanitarian organization, Inara. In this latest interview, I discussed with Arwa why she wasn't allowed entry into Gaza earlier this year, despite having made several further trips with her charity. Who benefits from the public's current perception of the war? And the personal impact on Arwa of having borne witness to so many of these conflicts throughout her career. She is, as ever, forthright and frank and open about her own emotions. I suppose we could even say her own pain, just as she's attuned to the pain of those she is reporting on. I'm Faisal Al Yafai. Here is this week's episode of The Lead. Arwa Damon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We spoke last year, just after your first trip to Gaza with your charity Inara, and that conversation was really well received for reasons we'll get into in a minute. But I understand you've since tried to go back into Gaza. You've been back into Gaza since that trip, and you've also been denied quite recently.
Yeah, so since we last spoke, I went back into Gaza 3 times. So over the last year, I've probably spent roughly 2.5 months there. And each time you would think it can't get worse. And each time it would get so much worse. And yes, what we have right now is a dynamic where Israel is really continuing to try to crush any sort of humanitarian effort. It extends beyond the reality that no aid has gotten in for nearly a month, that all bakeries have been forced to shut down, that community kitchens are begging international organizations to see if they have any leftover wooden pallets so that they can burn those to create fuel to be able to cook on. Right now, what we also have is this dynamic where Israel is denying an increasing number of humanitarian workers like myself and volunteers who are trying to go in as, medical doctors, emergency nurses, technicians. And we can't really figure out the logic behind this. I have repeatedly messaged COGAT, which is the Israeli entity that coordinates everything. I get 0 response.
Yeah.
You have people like me who have been in multiple times who are being denied. You have people who are trying to go in for the first time. You have people who have been outspoken about, what they've seen, the reality on the ground. You have people who haven't said anything.
Yeah.
But it's really just continuously, crushing this already broken humanitarian system. I mean, I used to say, humanitarian assistance in Gaza is on life support. Well, now, that machine is beeping and it's about to flatline.
This isn't happening just to your charity. It's happening to a wide range of healthcare professionals. And it's very unclear. I mean, you did a post on Instagram just after I think you were denied entry And you were explaining that it's really opaque, this process. You don't know whether you're going to be allowed in. You get a few hours notice. Because obviously there's a logistical aspect to it. It's not just you going in, you're trying to bring in cars and trucks and things like that. And then to be told at the last minute, I'm sorry, you can't come in, it really throws everything out of...
It does throw everything out of whack. And so it's basically two tracks. One, you have the humanitarian assistance and the massive cargo trucks, and that has been completely shut down for, more than a month now. And what we basically see is collective punishment and humanitarian assistance being used as a weapon of war.
Yeah.
And the other track is getting in humanitarian workers and people who are on medical missions. And that process, these convoys go twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. You apply for them through a UN process or through the World Health Organization. And then that list of people who want to enter on a certain day gets submitted to the Israeli side. They don't approve that list until roughly 6 hours before the convoy is supposed to depart. So either way, you have to show up, be ready in Amman. That's our departure point. And you don't even know if you're going in the next day.
Yeah. I mean, if it's so difficult for you on this side of the border, imagine how it is on the other side where people are trying to coordinate.
It's so close to impossible that it is something of a miracle each time any organization is able to pull something off. Because now it's not just the lack of assistance getting in, it's the lack of what's actually available to purchase inside. So we're always trying to look for workarounds.
Right.
Certain things aren't getting in. Okay, is there anything on the market? Is there anything anywhere in Gaza that we can purchase? Well, now, for example, you can find a couple of fresh vegetables, but that's local produce. Gaza used to have a very, vibrant agriculture. A lot of that has been destroyed, but there's enough where you can find things like eggplants and carrots and zucchinis, except a food parcel that's going to feed a family for roughly 2 to 3 days.
Yeah.
That food parcel of those few items is $60. Nobody can afford that.
Yeah.
You don't have potatoes. You don't have lemons. You don't have onions. You don't have flour. You have rice that is severely being depleted. If you look at what's actually being cooked up in these community kitchens, it's rice and canned vegetables. Plus, you have the lack of medical supplies, the lack of hygiene supplies. You don't have soap. You don't have a way to wash yourself. You don't have access to clean water. And so, again, we have this scenario where it's not just the bombs that are killing people, but so too is
the malnutrition,
spread of disease, the malnutrition.
And it's gone on for so long.
For so long. And there was a little bit of respite during the ceasefire where people were able to a certain degree, on the one hand, they were able to breathe again, but that was also the period where they were forced to really confront everything that was lost because they mentally weren't so hyper-focused on just survival. It became a focus on how do we move forward? And then that was gone. And then you look at the impact of this on children. So,
which is something your charity is very
focused on. And, kids and hope, that's a very different dynamic than an adult and hope. And when it comes to a child, when you hear and see the way that hope crushed impacts a child's psyche is very different than the way it impacts an adult psyche, especially when they're that young. And you hear them say, we lost hope in ourselves because we allowed ourselves to hope.
It's an awful thing to hear somebody say, be so young. And then not only is that happening in real time, it's happening in full view of the world.
I mean, that's been one of the many tragedies of all of this, is the fact that everything is happening in full view.
In full view.
And I remember I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said, I never believed that I was subhuman. I never believed it. I always knew that I was worthy. But now when I look at what our life has been reduced to, I have to force myself to convince myself that I am still worthy.
That's a deliberate decision.
Very, very, very deliberate. And then there's also something else that has really been observed among the children that I actually had never really seen in a child. And you see this in adults.
Right.
You see this in adults that have been through trauma and war and disaster and pain and anguish, how your entire way of being sort of shifts and you find joy and assign a positive emotion to things that are very basic. So you get joy in like a cup of tea. You get joy in being able to hear a bird chirp. Children in Gaza right now, you see them assigning extreme levels of joy to things that are fairly basic.
And you hadn't seen that before?
No, I hadn't seen that before. And my staff hadn't seen it before. And they were the ones that actually noticed it and were talking to me about it. Like, you shouldn't be in a position where you are so crushed that you are assigning that level of joy to something so small. But that's also when it comes to sort of the Palestinian psyche, the way that they resist.
Yeah. I want to come to some of that a bit later, but I want to just stick with you being denied entry. It's a deliberate decision to deny entry to healthcare workers, to anybody from the international community who might observe what's happening. And I wondered if you thought that that was very evident earlier this week when we had what looks now like the execution of 15 Palestinian paramedics.
Well, I don't know why it's not officially being called an execution. I mean, the UN came out and said that these 15 members of a rescue team, so eight of them were members of the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, another 6 were civil defense workers, and you had one member staff, UN staff.
Yeah.
And contact was lost with them. For a week, the UN was trying to get an answer from the Israeli side as to what happened. When they're finally allowed access to the site, the first day they dig up one body. A few days later, they're allowed access again, and they dig up the rest. And the UN says they were taken out one by one and killed.
Yeah, had their arms tied. They were shot in the head, shot in the chest.
That's an execution.
That's an execution, right.
That's a summary field execution.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about this with the producer because I think we've talked about this a lot on the podcast about the illustration of having the Ukraine war happening at the exact same time and, with some of the same people involved. And it's really interesting to watch the way these two wars are reported. If that had happened, if the Russians had executed 15,
outrage
on every newspaper front page in the world, which is execution, mass graves, and the language used would be, I suppose you would say, specific. It would be, this is an execution. These people were thrown in mass graves. There wouldn't be these caveats like, did it happen? What time did it happen? Were these people, I don't know, were they not warning the Israelis? All of these sorts of caveats. Yeah.
And it's not an isolated incident, right? Like, you need to, in that sort of same time span, if we're specifically talking about post the ceasefire being broken, so the last sort of, period since Israel broke the ceasefire,
right.
You also have the ICRC's guest house, one of them, targeted. This is a deconflicted location. What does that actually mean? It means that Israel has the coordinates and has said to the organization, we are deconflicting this location. Luckily, the strike was fired by a tank into the top floor. Staff were on the bottom floor, so nobody was injured. The UN Ops building in Deir el-Balah was targeted in a strike or artillery or something.
Yeah.
So the first strike did a bit of damage. The team evacuates. They return the next day to survey the damage. Again, a deconflicted site when another strike happens, killing one international worker and wounding another 5.
In another context, that would be called a double tap.
Exactly.
A straightforward description
double
of what
tap.
happened.
Even if there's 24 hours between it, that is called a double tap. Right. You hit once, you wait for a team to arrive, you strike again.
And when the Bashar al-Assad regime did that in Syria...
Oh, and the Russians did it in Syria. I mean, it's the Russian playbook.
Right.
It was the Russian Syria playbook. It's also been, the Russian Ukraine playbook. You have a strike that happened on one of the world's central community kitchens when volunteers were distributing food. What you have now also is, so basically with these deconflicted locations, organizations are supposed to be given a heads up that a strike is going to be happening nearby and that they should or should not evacuate.
Right.
we're not really getting much of that anymore. And so you have a number of strikes that are happening that are causing damage to these buildings and locations over and over and over again. And so this has always been a war with no rules, a war where the whole concept of the rules of war was just completely non-existent.
Yeah.
And now it's somehow been taken to the next level. And if you look at all of it, the lack of humanitarian aid, the level of suffering that has increased, the crippling of missions that are trying to get into Gaza, the targeting of locations that are meant to be deconflicted, and the ongoing targeting of distributions and hospitals and medical facilities. It's part of, or feels like it's part of, an overall strategy to scare people away from going to Gaza.
Yeah, even there, you're using caveats. You say it seems like it's not.
Because I think
it is a strategy.
Because part of your brain doesn't want to accept that level of it. Because part of your brain is saying, no, it can't be. Not in the 21st century.
Well, we accept it from the Russians. We accept that the Russians were doing those things deliberately.
We do.
So why the caveats?
I think maybe it's because we, or a lot of us, we still want to buy into this idea of democratically elected nations and
the values of the West
somehow, has a higher value, because if that is all of a sudden gone, as we actually do all know that it is, we do know that it is. But again, this is where you get into the psychology of it's so hard to accept that those values are actually so fake.
Is it hard to accept? We had this conversation with Omar Al-Akkad, who came on a few weeks ago, and I was asking him something similar, because he's also come to the conclusion during the course of the Gaza war that the value systems that he thought were real turn out not to be real. And I asked him, why is it taking you so long to understand that? It's the same question I'd have for you. Why? I mean, you've been...
The funny thing is that, you know what? I do understand this, and I do know it because I saw it from the first day that I set foot in Iraq. And even before the first day that I set foot in Iraq, when the post-9/11 dehumanizing rhetoric of Muslims and Arabs, and frankly, let's face it, anyone who's brown, was actually what drove me to journalism.
Right.
And yet there is a part of me that wants to hold on to this idea of, no, there are values and norms in this world, even if those who are meant to uphold them don't. Like, I have to. Our headspace is not, it's not this neat, clean space.
Yeah.
And the thing is expected behaviors, we become accustomed to expected behaviors from the Russians, the regime of Bashar al-Assad, Saddam Hussein back in the day, Gaddafi, you name it.
But why do you put those groups in one category and the other groups in a different category? And you say with one group, this is what we expect of you. And with the other group, even though they're behaving in a very similar manner, you're still saying, I think you can do better.
Because isn't that what they sell us to a certain degree? And isn't that what it's meant to be? Aren't they, the other group, supposed to represent, in theory, hypothetically speaking, what a better world would look like? A world with free speech, a world with freedom of choice, freedom of movement, freedom of opinion. And the thing is maybe it's that to a certain degree, I believe in the concept and the idea of what a democracy is supposed to represent.
Right.
Even though no nation actually fully represents that.
I mean, I'm pressing you a little bit on it, just like I pressed Omar.
Which is, but these are the conversations we need to have. Because I actually believe that we should be pressing each other so that we can start to unravel our thinking, because it's a very fair point.
Yeah. I mean, I recognize that the similarities or the differences between the United States or Britain and Russia are significant. But I'm also aware that the Russians talk about denazification in Ukraine. They talk about a special military operation in Ukraine. Why is it that when they use that kind of language, we immediately go,
you're lying.
What is this ridiculous?
Whatever.
Right. But then when other governments use it, we go, well, maybe if we just wait a bit, maybe if we push them a bit harder, maybe if we vote a different way. But just as I said to Omar, you've seen the war on terror. You saw the aftermath of the war on terror. You saw the Iraq war.
Well, and that's the thing. The aftermath of the 9/11 war on terror created even more terror. So that's the other thing that, you try to wrap your head around is, how is this repeating itself so fast?
Yeah.
In our lifetimes, in the last 20 years, we're seeing the repeat. And
And there were no consequences the first time around.
No, there weren't.
I don't think anybody has gone to jail for the war on terror. Yeah.
No, or for falsifying intelligence, or for any of it, or for Afghanistan. What is one of the main factors why the Taliban got so strong? It was
the chaos of the war.
And the Obama administration's campaign of bombing so many civilians. I mean, that just led to a flood of fighters into the hands of the Taliban. I was there recently, actually, with my charity.
Yeah.
And I went to this village in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's a very sort of surreal place to be in, because the Taliban, that basically openly kind of jokes about how they would have kidnapped you before, is now tasked with protecting you. And actually very supportive of the charity work that we're doing.
Wow. That's a hell of a thing to go through.
Yeah, no. But the point is, so I end up going to this far out village in the middle of the mountains, and 3-hour bumpy road from Mad Max or something.
Yeah.
The point is, this village had never seen a blonde person who wasn't trying to kill them.
Wow.
And so I show up there, and the kids initially were terrified of me. And then in the crowd, this one brave little girl comes forward and, introduces herself and breaks ice. And then as people were coming and getting the aid that we were distributing, I remember a couple of the adult men walking by and telling my colleague, at a CEO who's from Afghanistan, they would point to children and say, these are the only 2 left of their family. Or this child's whole family was dead. And you start to realize and see there's a reason why violence begets violence. That exists for a reason.
Yeah. Afghanistan is a useful one to think about because it's fallen off the front pages. People have forgotten about it. I mean, it seems like it's a war that's been deliberately filed away somewhere.
And that also goes back to the whole, maybe kind of like the psychology of all of it, and the way that, look, it's all of us will fall victim to this. It is easier to believe the frosting than it is to actually have to confront the ugliness of what's underneath it. And America very much tried to frost its whole effort in Afghanistan and the withdrawal of it as one thing, whereas in reality, it's something completely different. And, abandoning tens of thousands of Afghans who risked their life during the course of it.
But do you think, I wonder if being forgotten seems to me a form of violence on its own. And this is obviously related to Palestine as well. Because these people that you're talking about, particularly the younger generation, I mean, they're seeing the exact same things that you and I are seeing. They have smartphones, they have access to the internet, they're seeing TikTok, they're seeing Instagram.
They see the reaction
They see the reaction, They see what's happening in Ukraine. And it must inflict a kind of, emotional damage, maybe even a physical damage, because you're being completely forgotten by a world that used to pay attention to you and now seems not to care what's happening to you.
And we differentiate between, emotional and physical damage. And yes, obviously it's different to a certain degree, except we also need to recognize that when we talk about emotional damage, that is damage to one of our most important organs, which is our brain. Our brain is suffering because of that. But the thing is yes, it makes it harder also to keep going. And that is a very deliberate strategy that is repeatedly employed at military levels, at political levels, at whatever level you want. You inflict so much psychological pain, or you create circumstances where people turn away because apathy starts to grow, or because what they're looking at is so overwhelming that they feel hopeless in the face of it.
Yeah.
That's a strategy.
It's a deliberate strategy.
That is a strategy to shift a spotlight and world attention away.
Yeah.
That is repeatedly used in any war in recent times, in any sort of political campaign and or maneuvering. It's one of the many, they call them soft power arsenals that a warring party might have.
Yeah.
But it's very effective, and we need to be cognizant of it too, that it's being employed on us.
Right. I mean, this was one of the things I think that we centrally wanted to talk about, because the emotional manipulation seems to me really fascinating. There's a manufacturing of consent for what's happening in Ukraine. So all of these stories that come out, they are amplified by the politicians. They react to it in order to manufacture consent for the weapons to be sent and so on and so on. But then there's a tendency for the politicians and the media to say, because they're manipulating emotion, to say, well, this far and no further. We want you to be very upset about it, but now we're handling it, you can look away. They don't want the natural emotion to just keep continuing through the population, because that's something that can't be easily controlled. You say the same thing happening with Gaza. You see directly after the atrocities of October 7th, you see that there is an attempt to say, look at this, pay attention to it. You have tours of the kibbutzim, people seeing what happened, hearing the stories. And then once the war starts on the other side in Gaza, there's a tendency to say, just look away, don't worry about it, stop paying attention to it.
Well, and to take it one step further, actually, so there's the emotion that you're talking about that's, generated right after. And then there's the way that emotion continues to be manipulated. And one of the easiest to manipulate emotions is fear.
Right.
And that fear, you need to be afraid of something.
Yeah.
So who is the boogeyman who you design? And that's step one in dehumanizing a population, right? So when it came to Israel and Gaza, it was very quickly, it was all Gazans. All Gazans were storming in. All Gazans were celebrating. All Gazans were cheering. All Gazans voted for Hamas.
Right.
And then it's like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, half of Gaza wasn't even born or wasn't old enough to vote when Hamas came into power. 25% of the population in a poll right before October 7th said that they supported Hamas. So that's the vast majority of them not supporting Hamas. Gazans did try to rise up against Hamas in, I think, 2003, and then before that in 2001. I mean.
I wonder what you think the benefit of bearing witness has been. You joined us, the last time you joined us 7 months into the conflict, and it was the first time you'd been into Gaza. And I remember you said to me at the time, because I asked you if any of the story you're telling of the past 7 months from Gaza had made any difference. And you said, look, it's definitely not been in vain, because even though the reporting has not had the desired effect, meaning the end of hostilities in April of last year, which would have been to bring about an end to all this, there's been a shift in dynamics. And it's the first time that the story of Gaza is being told by Gazans through their own lens. Has there really been a shift in dynamics?
Maybe not dynamics per se, in as much as perspective.
Okay. Clarify what you mean
Which
by...
again goes back to that whole concept of, the Western world is not just seeing Gaza through the eyes of Western reporters and Western media and that Western lens. They're seeing it raw and unfiltered.
Okay.
But what almost makes that worse is the inaction that it has resulted in. It almost, actually, no, not almost. It does defy logic that an entire population there and the rest of us who want to see an end to this, who want to see peace, who want to see rebuilding, who want to see populations thrive, are literally being held hostage by not even two countries, but right now 2 leaders,
right?
President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right.
How do we, the people, have so little power? Where did the system break?
Yeah.
When did the system break? And more importantly, what do we do instead of falling victim to the dynamics of the system that is polarizing us? What do we do to bring each other closer?
I was talking to our colleague, Kareem Shaheen, who's also a friend of yours, and he was telling me about the conversations that you had with him in Beirut about why you started Inara, because I was thinking that part of it, and I think he said this, that part of it was that you felt that journalism just wasn't enough, that you were going into these war zones and you were filing reports, but somehow because of journalistic impartiality, you were not able to actually help those people.
Yeah, or not. It wasn't just journalistic impartiality. It was that journalism was no longer generating change.
Right.
You know, you could report on people being crushed to death or detained and disappeared, and all of these young, brave activists at the time who would risk everything just to get you a little bit of footage to try to prove to the world that they were being indiscriminately targeted and killed.
Right.
But journalism, by the time Syria had come around, I felt at least, still wasn't sort of shifting anything. And we want to fundamentally believe, and it goes back to human psychology, that journalism should generate change towards something better. If you show the world something horrible that is happening, an atrocity that is taking place, the suffering of people, the desire is for that to result in some sort of change. And I think for me, at least, to really have it sort of slapped in my face that no change. I felt as if I was in this sort of dark cesspool and I'm like clinging onto the edge of it, and my fingernails are getting ripped off. And it's like, what do I do?
And that was why.
And that was how I ended up with the idea to start this charity, because at the very least, the thinking was, if I start a charity when I'm out in all of these places and I'm meeting all these kids, as we all do, who have these horrific injuries, who aren't getting the treatment that they need, I am creating my own tool that I can then use to help them.
And that, it sounds to me like that was also the motivation behind your new project, the documentary Seize the Summit.
Yes.
Because there you were taking a group of people from Syria, Afghanistan,
and Ukraine,
and they were climbing Mount Kilimanjaro.
And one's in a wheelchair.
And there you are going beyond just reporting something. You're actually creating the conditions for, I guess, change in a small way.
Yeah, it's creating the conditions also for, as a viewer of the documentary, a certain maybe shift in perspective, because this isn't a lens or a framework through which people that are branded refugee are often seen. And the thing that I love about mountains, especially mountains that are extreme, is that they strip you of everything. The mountain doesn't care what your background is. The mountain kind of puts down this challenge and says, I dare you to summit me. And I will push you physically and psychologically, but I will teach you something. And unless you've done an intense mountain, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, which is why you're kind of looking at me like I've completely lost it. But they do. Mountains do that. And it's like the great equalizer. And so I wanted, because that's also how I deal with a lot of, my own mental head mess, give this to our 4 climbers.
It's because when I saw the documentary, you screened it in London, and you changed the way, because so often I think we are taught to look at people from Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, just purely as victims. Things are happening to them, and they are trying to cope with the circumstances that other people have projected upon them. But in this case, that's not the case. They are actually doing something. They are summiting a thing.
They are taking on a challenge, and they are taking on not just the physical and psychological challenge of it, they're also taking on the challenge of having to confront that which they buried. So this is what a mountain does too.
Yeah, that's where a lot of the emotion of the doc.
Exactly. And then also there's the way that they react with each other, the way that they talk to each other, the way that they end up bonding in the both silly and serious conversations. So often when you're out there in the field and you're just hanging out with people, you have these very, I guess, I mean, normal's not the right word.
Yeah.
But it is normal. You know,
human interactions.
Yes, very human, very basic, very simple. And those don't really make it into a news report.
Right.
But they're the moments that actually break down all these barriers between two people as individuals. And so I kind of also really loved that in the documentary, those were the moments that were the ones that exist.
Yeah. We were talking about it previously about this documentary. And I think one of the things that I liked about it was that you can imagine if people were trying to, let's say, humanize Syrians, the Afghans, the Ukrainians, the easy way to do it would be a kind of kumbaya moment where they have a Russian and a Ukrainian, they're climbing the mountain together and they find out by the summit that, oh, we're all just the same. And I thought, thank God that isn't the approach that you took. Because perhaps you're a better person than I am, so you care more about the kumbaya way of doing things. But I sometimes think that that's just a way of not really dealing with the reality of it. The Ukraine and Russia situation, it's not that the Ukrainians and the Russians need to understand each other. It's that one side needs to stop invading the other person's country.
Yes. But that needs to happen, but then also the next step needs to happen. I mean, if we're talking specifically about Ukraine and Russia.
For example,
I know at least that in the Western media, if that's all that someone is consuming, we know how the Ukrainians feel. We know their pain.
Yeah.
We know their fear.
Yeah.
We don't know how the Russians feel.
No, actually,
as a population. Like that is missing in the reporting. And it's for a number of different reasons, and it's really hard to report inside Russia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't actually know what the population is feeling and thinking.
Yeah.
And that's a piece of the puzzle that needs to be there. And it's the same thing if you watch. So I actually watch a lot of Israeli media.
Okay.
The English language sort of touting the government role in media. And then I read a lot of, Haaretz and Plus 972 are extraordinary publications. But if we're looking purely at what the average Israeli citizen, for example, is consuming, they know their own pain, obviously. And as does the Western media. They know the fear and the pain and the hurt of the hostage families and of October 7th. But they don't know how Gazans feel or think.
But with one of our colleagues who is Israeli, there's one of the things she often says is that there's a deliberate attempt not to know.
Oh, totally.
So it's not that the information is not presented. It's that I think at the moment they have their own pain to deal with, and then they're not worried about the external pain.
If you had two people in front of you, or two groups of people in front of you, Israelis and Palestinians, and you told them just to say sentences.
Okay.
Without identifying where they were from, they would say exactly the same thing. We laugh to resist. We're scared. They want to kill us. They want to destroy us.
Okay.
You look very skeptical.
Well, I'm not sure where this is going. I mean, the idea that two groups in conflict, Russians and Ukrainians, Israelis, Palestinians, are all human at the core, that's a well-known proposition. They are all humans at the core.
But we forget that. That's the point, is we forget that. This is where dehumanization comes in. This is how we end up viewing someone as less than. When we lose the ability to recognize that someone, even if we label them the enemy, even if they legitimately are our enemy, is going to hurt exactly the same way we are, that's when we all lose. We know, you and I know, that we feel core human emotions in exactly the same way. But a lot of people out there, and I think this was something that I also had to confront and realize, who have been subjected to the dehumanization, who actually view other populations as being less than and less worthy, do not understand and or accept that they feel pain in exactly the same way.
But much of the time, the dehumanization comes after the politicians have decided to enter the war.
No, it's before. I believe it's a campaign that starts way before.
Yeah. But I think the point I was making is that you do need to open the tap. The dehumanization of Ukrainians by Russians was something that predated the invasion. But you needed the tap of the invasion to open. Otherwise, it was just a country on your border and you weren't paying attention to it. I think sometimes the conversation is missed is that there is an aspect of power to this, that there is a decision taken. It's not merely that there are two groups of people and they don't know each other or they hate each other. It's that there are acts of power made that end up with tanks and fighter jets and so on. And once that happens, it's much easier to switch on the tap of dehumanization.
100%.
Right. But you need to have the war first, I think.
100%. But that's where we need to be more conscious of this, because this, again, it's a manipulation of our emotion. And we are constantly being subjected to manipulations of our emotions, which is what enables these behaviors. And for some reason, the big collective we has not woken up to this. People don't know how to prevent this from happening.
You talk about a big collective we. I wanted to ask you about a philosophical question, which I know is making the rounds now, about Gaza. And we had this conversation when the author Omar Al-Akkad came on the podcast. And it's about whether you think Gaza represents a moral rupture, a moment when something broke in the way the world understands justice.
I would say that the way the world understands moral justice was already starting to tear, and Gaza just completely shredded it.
You do accept that there's been a moral rupture. The world, as Pankaj Mishra says, is now different to the world that preceded it.
Yeah.
What do you think it says about the world that preceded it that we ended up in that space?
I think this is the path we put ourselves on.
We collectively. And we put ourselves on this path how?
By failing to learn from history, by allowing ourselves to be manipulated, by being driven by emotions like greed and selfishness, as opposed to, whatever people might laugh and say, like to go run in a field with flowers, but kindness and compassion. We have been on this trajectory that has been causing this tear in our moral compass. And I used to say, Syria broke our moral compass, which I still believe. And Gaza has just ripped everything apart. And some people will say, well, okay, but look at what happened in Sudan. It's just as bad. 100% it's just as bad. So why is Gaza so much in the spotlight versus Sudan? I would argue that, one, it's racism.
Yeah,
to a certain degree.
Of course,
big part of it. Big media is not that
the
interested.
victims in Sudan are not white.
Exactly. They're very dark. And also, part of it is, and that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is that one of the warring parties when it comes to Gaza is a democratically elected nation state that is committing war crimes on a daily basis. Yeah. As opposed to in Sudan, you have two.
Yeah, it's very unclear.
It's
extremely unclear, actually.
Informal. The National Army and the Rapid Forces against each other, but it wasn't no one looked at Sudan and said, that's a democracy that has fallen apart. Whereas when again, it goes back to this idea of what we want to believe in when it comes to labeling a country a democracy. And here you have, in Gaza, the world's largest democracy, the United States, refusing to back down from its support of another country that identifies as a democracy, which is Israel.
Yeah, I suppose my question is more, why do we expect democracies to act differently? They have interests of power, just as those militias in Sudan do.
I think it's for the same reason that we expect journalists to act differently, that we expect humanitarians to act differently. There are certain labels. Yeah. There are certain industries that when you are a part of that, you are expected to and are held to a higher moral standard. If a country's going to call itself a democracy, it is, again, hypothetically speaking, saying, I am going to uphold democratic principles, which include certain moral and legal positions. When you say, I am going to be a humanitarian, you are upholding certain humanitarian principles. When you say, I'm going to be a journalist, you're upholding certain journalistic principles.
But if you stop behaving in a certain way,
Oh, yeah, that label should go.
We take away the label from you.
Yes,
right.
we should.
So
again, in theory, we should, yes.
I mean, how many times do you need to violate that label before we go, okay, well, I mean, it's just gone. We're not going to use it anymore about you.
I mean, this might be slightly inappropriate to say, but maybe it's going to be when, the world grows a pair.
I was thinking about Palestinian resilience and the importance of being resilient and of being publicly perceived as such. And I wondered how that feels for you, because you have been in these situations. And of course, you would say your experiences can't compare to the Palestinian experience in Gaza because, of course, you get to leave. But I wonder if there's a tendency to think that you need to be strong. Like there's a private cost to you of trying to be publicly strong.
I mean, first of all, resilience is my least favorite word.
Yeah.
And when you speak to Palestinians, a lot of them that I've talked to don't like being labeled resilient either. And it's because it almost implies that person, that population can keep taking the blows.
Yeah.
And as such, you know what? It's okay.
Yeah.
Sure, drop the bombs. They're Palestinians.
They're strong,
They're strong.
They
They're
teach
resilient.
the world resilience,
And that's not the case. They are hurting. It's not resilience. It's something that's an inner human strength to survive. They are surviving. And they are holding on to those tiny little specks that they can of little things that serve to remind them that they are human, that they are still alive. But you see it in people's eyes. You hear it, especially when you get to know people.
Right.
I hear it in the tone of voice of people who I know. I hear it in the way that they sigh, and just those sighs say so much more than anything that they're able to articulate. And yes, when I'm in Gaza, I do have to be strong, because when you look at tragedy and trauma, if you're not at the center of it, which obviously I'm not, you do need to be strong for those who are. And when I'm in Gaza, I'm going to be bouncy and sparkly, and I'm going to try to make kids laugh, and I'm going to, giggle with adults, even if there's nothing to laugh at, and just bring a little bit of sort of up energy into it. But believe me, like the minute I'm out of the field, even if I'm back in the guest house, I'm on the floor in the bathroom, just trying to sort of sob it out because it's stuck in my throat and it's sitting on my chest. And it's not my sad, it's not my hurt. But you don't witness that level of pain in another human being and walk away untouched. And I wouldn't want to walk away untouched, because how horrible of a person would that make me if you could see what I've seen and what others have seen in Gaza and just be fine. You shouldn't be fine after you see that.
Sometimes in our conversations, I feel that you don't want to be fine because you feel you'd feel guilty if you felt fine.
Yeah.
That you want to carry that hurt with you.
You do carry the hurt with you. It's not that you don't want to feel fine. It's that you do carry the hurt with you. I think a lot of us carry the hurt with us. When someone says to me, like the younger generation says to me, I want to be like you, I want to follow your path, whether it's journalism or humanitarian or whatever, what's your advice?
Yeah.
And I say, you need to recognize that you will give up a part of yourself that you probably will not be able to define, and you need to be okay with that.
You feel that has happened to you.
Oh, 100%. There are little pieces of you that you leave behind, and what you have left for yourself, it definitely darkens, and it becomes harder to allow yourself to get out of that darkness, because on the one hand, you don't want to forget. And so you need to recognize that even if you allow yourself to get out of sort of the darkness, you're not forgetting.
You're not giving up on those people.
You're not giving up on them. I mean, and this is where, your brain argues with itself on a constant basis. That whole argument of, yes, Arwa, but if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to then turn around and be this sort of positive little bundle of energy that runs around and just gets things done and is a bit silly, that makes people laugh and figures it out and will scrap a diaper from here and a pediatric intubation tube from there. But you carry a lot of it with you, and it's cycles. And I've been doing this my whole career. I mean, I've been in this sort of these cycles for 20 years now. And so I'm familiar with it, and I know how to help myself cycle sort of out of it, empty those emotional buckets per se, except over the last 2 weeks, I've really struggled with it. And I catch myself thinking these phrases sometimes of, wow, like this time, the sad, it's making my energy vibrate wrong. Like I'm not vibrating the way I'm supposed to. There's a level of sort of sad and hurt that I feel in my cells, and I don't know how to unload it.
That is a heavy toll to take on one person. When we ask people to do very hard things in the military, there is a whole support network, and then there's an understanding of why they're doing it. It sounds as if you are taking on quite a lot of the pain of the world, but you are bearing it alone.
I mean, let's not overblow like what I'm doing. I think the difference is it's my choice. I am choosing this. It's not my job. I don't get paid for the work I do for Inara. Journalism was my job, but I basically chose and pushed for where I wanted to go. And I think it's how I've chosen to live. Which makes me sound like I'm completely miserable all the time. Like, by the way, I'm a really funny, depressed person. Like, I crack myself up.
I mean, you are funny.
Oh my God. People are going to listen to this and be like, huh?
No, you are funny.
We have to be honest about how we feel. Like, people aren't, there's nothing heroic about what anyone is doing. We all choose how we want to live our life. And I think this is what I've chosen. And it's messy and it's not clear. And, my headspace is not clean. And it's still trying to figure all these things out for me and for other people or, whatever it is. But
the reason I think I'm interested in these questions is because, as you say, you're a role model to a lot of people. Frankly, you're a hero to a lot of people. And when we've seen each other in real life with other people on stage, you see the people come up to you, see the way they look at you, they see the way they think about you and your work and your accomplishments. But I also think it's important for people to hear that there is, you describe it as the sad, but it's important to understand that there is a weight that these roles take on you. And sometimes that the weight can swallow you whole.
Yeah, and that's when, you suffocate. And then you need to... So I have a very weird kind of like barometer that I use to check in with my own mental headspace. So my songs on my phone are all, like most of the songs, like, does this song make me happy? Does this song make me skip? Does this song make me want to skip down the street? And if it does, it's on my playlist. And I can sort of check in on myself, because if I play those songs and I'm not skipping, they make me want to cry, then I know I'm not okay.
And then you need to change something.
And then, look, when I started the charity at Inara, it helped me a lot because I was able to take all of this emotion, and I was able to take the sad, I was able to take the anger, I was able to take all of it, and I was able to channel it into action. And I think what has been very hard to deal with right now with being, denied access into Gaza is there's no action that I can take. Like, it's there. It's this concrete wall that has been put up in front of me. And there's only so much that I can do from the outside to encourage the team to try to think outside of the box of, okay, so this is missing, we can replace it with this, or we're not able to do X, we can turn around and do Y. Like, I'm not in it.
Yeah, the outlet is gone.
Exactly. And so what's my yeah.
My last question is about hope and your relationship with hope. I wanted to ask you if you think that the storytelling has made a difference, and if maybe you've come to terms with the fact that the possibility that it might not.
I have very much come to terms with the fact that storytelling may not make a difference in the grand scheme of things, but I still believe in its value because history needs to be recorded. I also came to the realization that I do not have hope and that I also don't need hope. Hope is not my motivator. And in realizing that, I have to a certain degree, I think, taken power back because I will still do something even if it's hopeless.
Arwa Damon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been The Lead from New Lines Magazine. Arwa Damon is on Twitter at I am Arwa Damon. This week's episode was produced by Finbar Anderson and hosted by me, Faisal Al Yafai. For more like this, subscribe to The Lead on your favorite podcast app or visit our website, newlinesmag.com.